Okay, I think we're back. This is our Sacred Cow Barbecue on Freedom Slips Revolution Radio. I'm Patricia Aiken, and it's my immense pleasure to have Rudy Stanko and Dr. Roger Roots on the show tonight. They are two amazing law dogs. Rudy got his legal education the hard way, and Roger at least got to go to school for it a little bit easier. They're both Americans and believe that this totalitarian regime that we're facing in this country, this complete Bolshevik nightmare that has come over America, needs to stop. And I feel, gentlemen, that the Bundy cases, both of them, and the Finicum case are going to be watershed issues. Do you agree that they're that important, Roger?
It's interesting because you look. I regard these cases as petty. In terms of the allegations are so petty, and I can't believe. But as you say, they're watershed only because the government is making these huge deals out of them. Mm-hmm. But the underlying alleged facts really are petty. You look at recent American history, the Weather Underground. There were groups in America that were blowing up federal buildings. I mean, my God, Black Panthers. There were, over. I mean, and just in the last 30 years. And then you look at current U.S. District of Oregon, U.S. District of Nevada. These claims involving nothing more than standing there with a gun and having a protest about federal. Trespassing, federal, even if there is a disagreement over federal land, over land policy. I mean, these are such petty cases. Not a single shot was fired except by the government against the American people.
Right, and that's what one of the attorneys said. He says he just got on the case, and he said this just looks like a glorified trespass case. And there is no trespassing in the Oregon case. The doors were open. They left the keys. They lured them down there. There were obviously infiltrators that want, where's the trespass? There isn't any.
Yeah, I'll tell you. And you know what? I really sympathize with some of these poor guys who went there. I mean, honestly, they felt like they were, taking a constitutional stand, and some of them probably were a little nervous. Well, they probably, thinking, well, maybe I could face a trespassing charge or something. Yeah. And they're looking at these federal felony indictments. It really is. It's tragic. It's terrible.
Yeah, when you have a 24-year-old like Jake Ryan or something like that. I mean, but his mother made a great point. He said if more Americans would stand up, this would stop.
Yeah, the government has gotten so it's much more powerful than it used to be. The listeners should read up about the big FBI shootouts with Ma Barker and the Bonnie and Clyde. That period in the 20s and 30s and 40s. Mm-hmm. When the FBI was just sort of getting started, they would lose shootouts to the American people, like they would be outgunned at that time. And today, I mean, they're so used to being so ensconced in security and power and overwhelming force, helicopters, machine guns. The government we're living under at this point is not anything remotely like intended under the founding documents of the country. So, yeah, it might be a watershed. These might be watershed cases, but if they are, it's not because of their underlying facts.
No, it's not because of the facts. It's because to shut down the government from these illegal prosecutions and the complete unlawlessness that the government is exhibiting nowadays. So, Rudy, let's talk about the bill of particulars that you spent 4 days on. This is about the Nevada case, correct?
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah, I just concentrated on the Nevada indictment. I knew Roger was up in Oregon, and he had the Oregon indictment under his belt. And of course, Roger went to Bend, Oregon, there, and got some affidavits for
Ryan
Bundy. And so I concentrated, and I spent 4 days because I told Roger, I said, this indictment in Nevada is really complicated. And obviously there's a lot of double jeopardy issues. There's a lot of gun motions for dismissing for guns that they're really not citing the person who was aimed at with the gun, or whether the guns. Then we have it right. There's certain guns that are exempt from federal law. If the gun is older than 1893, at what you call an antique, and then there's certain clauses in the statutes that say possibly that shotguns and hunting guns are not under federal jurisdiction. The Congress put that in there because they really wanted to restrict the federal government, but the judges and the prosecutor ignore all these clauses. So we have to know what type of gun this is. This is the first thing. And the next thing is, in order for the federal government to get jurisdiction on any of these guns, they have to cross interstate. And if they don't know what model the guns are, then that kind of throws those particular charges out. So there's a lot of research that needs to go into this. So basically, my bill of particulars asks, when did these charges occur? How did they occur? And who are the people? And what are the make and the model and the years of the firearms supposedly that were brandished? And that's how they can wrap these charges. And I feel that they could run some of these charges consecutively, but most of them would be concurrent. That means they overlap because they happen at the same time. So I outlined the dates when these particular charges happen and what charges and what charges they're quoting under the statutes. But primarily I want to know what age of the guns are, did they travel in interstate commerce, and who were they pointed at? And I think any defendant needs to know this in order to defend their case. And most of them are all charged with brandishing firearms. And of course, the federal law states that brandishing is pretty broad. In fact, you're just carrying a gun. That means you're brandishing a gun. But I think that's an unconstitutional statute. That needs to get filed, that you can have a gun on you and still not be brandishing it. So you have to challenge that statute. And the reason you want to challenge it, in case the judges, and these judges probably dismiss all these motions that you file, you got appealable issues, right, and you never know when you're going to hit a jackpot. Now, Roger and I have been pretty fortunate. I think we win probably 40% of our appeals that we file. And, of course, I say Roger wins them because he's the writer, and I always say I'm the fighter. But that's primarily what my bill of particulars is all about, and it needs to get filed because they need to ask these questions, and they can't defend it until the questions are answered. And so I distributed it to Clyde Bundy, and of course he said he's got to take it to his lawyer. Oh, I talked to Clyde's lawyer about it, and he said, well, yeah, it's pretty good, but these judges never rule on them. Well, that doesn't matter. Get the damn thing filed.
Yeah, that's how I feel, because you're setting up the appeal at that point. Even if they don't, you're setting up the appeal. You want to have all this in the record, right?
It's a constitutional right to know the nature and the cause of the accusation. That's part of the game. Even though they admit they understand the indictment, nobody does. I don't understand.
Oh no, none of the men said they understood it. They said, "Do you understand the charges?" And they all said no. Good for them.
Oh, they all did that. Did they say that there in Nevada when they got arraigned, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. And Cliven was great. He said when they asked him for his plea, he says, "Well, I'd be happy to give you a plea if you'll first demonstrate to me how you have jurisdiction over me."
Yeah, I seen that. I read that. Yeah. So, well, that's great. Well, at least they start. Now they got to follow up with a bill of particulars because they'll sweep that under the rug because you know what the judge says. Well, we're going to plead you not guilty. So the judge takes it in his hand and it kind of gets swept under the rug now. Mm-hmm. But at least they made their point. But they have to follow up now with a bill of particulars and demand this before they go to trial, because if they don't get these answers, I don't see how they can defend the case.
Right. And so I agree, and I think these are two. And is it just because there's 19 of them that there's a communication issue? The man the other day, and I talked with him afterwards, and he seemed all right. But I mean, he's sitting there, and he says to the feds, "I'd rather be watching a basketball game right now."
Yeah, that's typical. I mean, they pretend like they have their interest of their client in their heart, but they really don't.
Oh no, this is just another day at the office for him.
Yeah,
He
right.
doesn't understand that these men's freedom is in jeopardy if they don't do something. They got a lawyer up here. So,
Yeah.
I want to, let's talk about this brandish thing because that's, well, and there's one other word that I know the feds are going to use, but let's talk about brandishing. I don't believe brandishing means that you're carrying a firearm.
Well, let
Brandishing,
me
it's got
read
to
you.
be that you
I
got to
think
wave it around and point it at somebody. Am I wrong?
well, I'll read you what it says, all right?
Okay.
I'll read you what statute. I'll read it verbatim here. For purposes of this section, which is 18 USC 924 CD4, the term brandish means, with respect to a firearm, to display all or part of the firearm or otherwise make the presence of the firearm known to another person in order to intimidate that person, regardless of whether the firearm is directly visible to that person. That's what their definition.
Wow.
Well, wait a minute. So that would
is.
mean that everybody that open carries is brandishing.
Exactly. It's a total violation of the Second Amendment in District versus Heller. That's the famous Second Amendment.
Let me just say, just think about the word bear arms in the Second Amendment. Second Amendment says that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. How similar is the word bear to the word brandish? It's very similar. So, on the one hand, you've got a constitutional provision that says you have a right to do this, and on the other hand, there's a statute that says, well, it's a crime to do this. It's amazing.
Well, these statutes aren't laws. They're codes and statutes that have been given the force of law, and that's how, in my opinion, this whole Talmudic system that we have of injustice got taken over.
Yeah,
and you have these. I had a woman that's running for Congress and she loves to say, "Oh yes, well we're lawmakers and we're going to make." We don't need more laws. We need less law repealers.
Put it in the hands of the jury. Let the jury decide the law again. We're back to the common law.
Well, it seems to me a lot of those. The indictment is filled with this claim that they're brandishing a firearm in a crime of violence. Okay, well, they're basically stacking inference upon inference upon inference. The claim by the government is that there were people that had firearms visible, and therefore these federal bureaucrats supposedly were too scared to load some cows onto a trailer, and that constitutes an act of armed robbery.
Well, no,
crime of violence.
but here's the thing. That the feds had already agreed to give the cattle back before anybody ever moved from the protest area over to the overpass in the wash. They had already agreed to release the cattle. So they weren't intimidating anyone. That's ridiculous.
Now, here's another thing that needs to get brought out, and I brought it out in my bill of particulars. I want to know exactly how many cattle they are, because if you read the indictment or some clauses, it's like $3 million worth of cattle. Now, they'll use this figure, the probation people will use the $3 million figure if the Bundys get convicted of anything. And basically, when you look at the sentencing guidelines, they go by the dollar amount and how many dollars are involved in these cattle, then that increases their years of imprisonment.
Well, they're going to have to subtract how many cattle the feds killed.
Yeah, exactly. All these questions need to be asked before they go to trial, so it doesn't just rely on the probation people's sentencing report.
Yeah, so they're going to have to they're going to have to get the contracts because these men were under contract, and one of the snipers in one of the helicopters said, they were told it was going to be Waco. Well, why is it that the government gets to do terroristic threatening, threaten a man with 7 children and a pregnant wife with Waco, and that's not violent rhetoric? That's not terroristic threatening? I don't get it.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
I sometimes say it won't be long before the American people will be made to bow to federal workers, and after we are made to bow, it won't be long before we're made to kneel. And I mean, that's where we're going in this
Oh,
country.
well, and so that's what my friend's husband says. Stand up and be counted, or lay down and be mounted. I mean, this is what it's coming to. Is America is going to stand up? Do we have any hope? Is it? I don't even think we're at the 3% yet. I don't think so. But I don't think it's going to take a huge uprising. But they are gearing up with the technology now. There was a videotape of a reporter in some kind of government employee, law enforcement guy, was showing off this armored vehicle, and she said, "Well, I can see that maybe in the streets of Iraq, but America, well, what's this for?" And she says, and the guy replied clear as day, "Oh, well, there are a lot of constitutionalists out there that have a lot of guns and ammunition. They're tipping their hand."
Yeah.
Listen, everybody,
Well, a
you're
lot
listening
of
to
these.
Sacred Cow Barbecue. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. We are listener and volunteer supported, and I'm so grateful for my guest tonight. But I want to ask you to help us, run over to freedomslips.com, make a donation, get the archives. They're only $5 a night. You can listen to all these shows. Buy something cool, this amazing seed packets and things like that. Help support the station. If everybody figured out $2 a month for listening, we'd never have to make these appeals. And so we appreciate all the listeners and volunteers that make this, and everybody tonight's a volunteer. So we're talking with Rudy Stanko, author of The Score. You got to read this. And also Dr. Roger Roots, author of The Conviction Factory. I mean, I haven't been able to call it court ever since I started reading your book, Roger. I mean, it totally is. So I really, what else is on the bill of particulars, Rudy?
Well, I say too, if I was in contact with Clive, my first step would be to sue the brand people and sue the federal government for taking his cattle. First of all, if you think about this is all open range. So who's responsible for fencing this property? And all these cattle were strays. Now, if the federal government doesn't want Bundy's cattle on their property, they better fence it.
Well, exactly. Nevada's a fence-out state, but
right.
but the feds are claiming the trespass because they're saying it was federal land. But that's where it all comes back to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. And so let's talk about that for a minute, because what the feds are trying to argue is that they acquired the land. And that is the wrong term, because acquire, according to Black's Law Dictionary, can mean that it was purchased for money, or that was acquired by, it was received by some other method. But no, the Constitution says purchased with money. They have to purchase it, and they never have. That's why they own 85%, of the state. A big bunch all over the West is completely controlled, as you both know.
Well, yeah. Now, here's the question I think that's got to be asked. Obviously, if you read these cases that Bundy's been filing in the court, they all claim that the United States acquired this land under the Treaty of
Guadalupe Hidalgo.
Hidalgo, yeah. And now, okay, so fine, they acquired the land under the treaty, but then Nevada comes into the Union. Now, if Nevada's land, which is 90% federal, why did they make the boundaries clearly in the state of Nevada, where the boundary lines, they should have just limited to Las Vegas and Reno, because that's about the only land that's privately owned in the state of Nevada. So Nevada really wasn't, they shouldn't have had the state boundaries, if you understand what I mean, because I'm going back to the Northwest Ordinance that every state that comes in the Union should come on the equal footing of the original 13 colonies according to the Northwest Territory and any states after that.
Exactly.
And I think that's probably the argument of most people, but now I'm thinking, well, if Nevada became a state in about, 1869, somewhere around there?
Right.
Why did they have all these public lands? And I don't think any of these public lands, or I call them the security on the national federal debt, they're privately owned. That's pure communism when the United States owns all this land. If that's not communism, I don't know what definition of communism when they own so much land in the world.
No. In Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 is very clear that they can only have control of those lands while the state, before it's a state, as it's a territory. And that's been the Bundys' gripe all along, that the feds treat us like it's a territory. For instance, where they put up that First Amendment area, and it was fenced off. If you want to say anything, you got to go get in the First Amendment area. And everyone's going like, are you kidding me, Jack? This whole country's a First Amendment area. But they're treating us still like a territory. And I think it goes back to the Reconstruction Acts of 1867. I sent a letter to the Congressional Research Institute, pardon me, Congressional Research Service, asking if the Reconstruction Acts of 1867 had ever been ended or repealed. Took them 8 weeks to respond, and they sent back a page and a half, single space, and it basically said, look it up yourself. They're not even admitting to it now. That's how they're getting away with still treating us as territories, in my opinion. And the Buck Act and the War Powers Act and all that. The Constitution was suspended. And when the American people wake up and realize that, I think we'll get it back. But
this might be this is why I'm really interested in the case, because that's the heart of the Constitution, is that the federal government's not supposed to own any property except for dockyards and 10 square miles of Washington, D.C., unless they get the consent of the state legislatures, which they never do.
Right, and they've never bought it.
No, they never. So really, it's I don't know what they like to call it, public lands, even though it's Bureau of Land Management and the National Forest Service. Obviously, I still say that's pure communism when the United States owns property.
You know, and it wouldn't be so bad if they weren't the Bureau of Land Mismanagement. But the land is all there's 4 times as many range fires now as there ever was before, since the BLM has been trying to manage the horses and all that kind of, I mean, it's horrible. They are horrible managers. It has nothing to do with managing the land and everything with locking it away from the people.
I really think the Federal Reserve wants people off there and kind of regulate this as their own private domain. That's basically, they want to keep the enterprises and the economic values of the property away from private ownership. That's obviously why they're trying to curtail grazing rights. They certainly were doing that up in my grazing rights when I was in Teton. I could see it, the writing on the wall there.
Right, and it's all about these the minerals under the soil and the water rights. Harry Reid owns 3 parcels around the Bundy Ranch, and the BLM owns another.
Really? Harry Reid owns some land around there, does he?
Oh, I'll send you the maps. You'll see it. That's what this is all about. And they have to start depositioning, people for this, because no, that was brought up right after the raid, that he owns them and he's behind it, as if you don't know. And that's why he was threatening Carol Bundy. Oh, now that the Bundy men are in jail, we're going to come get those cattle.
So, how much land does Harry Reid own?
Oh, the big parcels. I don't know the acreage amount, but big parcels all around the ranch, plus the BLM. So, and they want it. That's why they were moving the desert tortoises from this other place down, where he had this Chinese deal going for solar energy and stuff. I mean, oh yeah, it's corrupt as the day is long. Just think, like the thing in Harney County. Lazaro Esanaro has done a phenomenal job showing the corruption there. I mean, it goes all the way to Hillary Clinton, Uranium One. They already had the Hammonds sold.
So, Roger, what type of affidavit did you find up in Harney County? What was the general?
Well, I'll tell you, I interviewed a number of witnesses. Basically, they were all very consistent. What the press reported as an armed takeover was a complete illusion. It did not happen. There was no armed takeover. There never was a time when anyone was barred from entering or exiting. Nobody ever stopped anyone from coming in, including public officials, including actual, BLM and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They were coming in.
They were invited. The FBI was begged to come and meet with them face to face.
And the witnesses I spoke to all said about the same thing. They felt very comfortable. There was no tension. There was no intimidation going on. So, I mean, that to me, that in itself just sort of blows the allegations of the government wide open. I mean, the government has made claims just that are not true. And then there are many other factors. Maybe I shouldn't get into too many details, but
Well, I heard from Tom Davis this week that Les Zaitz actually went ballistic this week. He went to Glenn Palmer's office, the Sheriff Palmer over in Grant County, and he went to his office and asked for him. And when they said he wasn't in, he just went insane, just threw a big fit. There weren't any deputies around, and they had to call the bailiff from the court to come and get him out of the building. I mean, this thing is falling apart. It's pretty
Davis?
Interesting.
Who's Davis?
Oh, Tom Davis. He owns High Desert Rough Stock up there. Some people know him as Tall Tom, rodeo guy. He's been very involved in this in the investigation. He has. I think you probably were at his house, Roger. He. He's a rancher. He's a rancher
in that county.
And they do him and an investigative journalist named Renee Powers do a blog site called The Cowboy and the Lady, where they're investigating this whole thing. And they've brought up a bunch of stuff. Another man by the name of Lazaro Esanaro, who's kind of new to all this, but he worked with Senator Ted Stevens and stuff on a case of his own. And so he knows his way around research, and he's dug up. There's not even 2 degrees of separation between everyone. And here we have Judge Grasty. He found out that he actually owns a house in Sun Valley, Idaho. That's pretty high dollar.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We've got a ton of research on this.
Yeah, I was going to say another aspect. There were, get this, in the Harney County, Oregon, so-called armed takeover. There were protesters and demonstrators who came onto the what's called the Malheur Wildlife Refuge and were insulting Ammon Bundy and the whole crowd there, insulting them, calling them names, and there never was a time when there was any violence. Nobody stopped them. Nobody said, "Get the hell out of here." I mean, how much of an armed takeover is it if your enemies and your opponents are able to come up to your face and call you names, and you don't? I mean, you don't even. I mean, this is how preposterous the case is.
Well, there was one night when a bunch of drunks came down. I'm sure they were paid to come down, had a little scuffle with the guy on guard duty, but that was it. I mean, the rest of the time it was an open house. You walked in and they fed you. I mean, they had so much beef coming from the ranchers that they had to put it out in the snowbanks to keep it cold.
Yeah, and another aspect, that area is a hunting mecca in which the town is very familiar. Nobody in that town is intimidated by strangers coming in with rifles because it happens every single year in hunting season. It's a hunting mecca for birds and everything else. And so the government's claim that, the town people were just scared to death of these outsiders and these guys coming in with guns into their county. It's just preposterous.
It's totally preposterous. But Karl Marx's favorite maxim is accuse others of what you do. So if there was any intimidation, it was the fact that the FBI was staging out of the school, that they have all these Apache helicopters and Black Hawk helicopters and took over the airport, had armored vehicles. There's the intimidation. They've been going around and rousting people out of their vehicles, searching them. And then just for intimidation, they would drive the car 100 yards forward after they were done searching it and make the person walk to it just to humiliate them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's unbelievable what's gone on in that town. And it's because there's so much money this is not only about the money, about the uranium, it's about the Federal Reserve. This could take the whole situation down if all this corruption's exposed, and they know it. That's my take on it. So, but I don't think they have a case, but that's not going to stop them. And
Well, it's all about. Remember, it's all about narratives. The government has created a narrative, and they point to one thing or another and say, "Well, here's what was happening," and the media just absolutely ran with their narrative.
Well, that's
and
because the media is just
was
their
fundamentally false.
And that's the thing I enjoyed about that was it told me who a so-called alternative media really is. It told you the real people from the shills. Whoever ran with that narrative, I go, oh, I always wondered about you. So, Rudy, were you following this while it was going on?
You know what, the Oregon situation?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I kind of was a financial man behind Roger. I bought his airplane tickets out there so he could go out and do some investigation. And so, yeah, I definitely got all my information from Roger, basically, asked him what really is going on. And so that's why Roger kind of concentrated on the Oregon deal, and I kind of concentrated on breaking down the Nevada indictment.
Well, good. That seems like a good division of labor.
That's how we kind of split up our time.
Well, I'm really seeing you folks being involved here, officially. What do you think are they going to be able to deny Clayman?
Are they going to be able to survive?
Yeah, they're going to be able to not put Clayman on the case?
Well, let me just say, every defendant has an absolute constitutional right to the lawyer of his choice, all right? The Constitution and the Sixth Amendment says you have a right to counsel. That doesn't mean you have to take the counsel that is government approved or that the judge wants you to take. So Cliven Bundy says he wants Larry Clayman as counsel, and so Larry Clayman has submitted a form. He's not a Nevada licensed lawyer. He's licensed in other jurisdictions, and he has a Nevada licensed law firm that is vouching and signing his paperwork for him. And the judge thus far has said no, he's not fit to come into Nevada in the case. My hunch is that will ultimately be overturned because I think the Ninth Circuit has some case law that's very favorable on that. That's my hunch.
Yeah, I understand that cases have been forfeited on that and overturned because they didn't allow the defendant to have their counsel of choice. And it clearly they don't want Clayman because he has that quaint little notion that nobody's above the law.
Yeah.
Yeah,
another. Go ahead, Rudy.
Well, obviously that's up to Clyde Bundy to make his choice, but I'm finding it kind of difficult that they don't want Roger on the scene when I'm willing to subsidize Roger and all his research effort. They keep saying they're short of money, they need money. Well, I'm saying I'll give a real legal scholar here, whatever his retaining fees are just to go out there, but I want you to agree that Roger was going to be on there as a pro hoc VJ. If that means that at least Roger will have some input on the case and not just be a research person in the background. And obviously I can't see why, if they're really serious about claiming defending Bundy, why don't they interlocutory appeal it right now to the Ninth Circuit? That's the first thing I would do if I was really sincere about beating these guys and giving them a fight. So I question why Hansen didn't say, well, let's just appeal it. And I'm sure that I think the Ninth Circuit, there's case law to support that Bundy has a right to have Clayman be his attorney.
Right, and I don't understand why somebody of Roger's stature, isn't welcomed with open arms.
Right, yeah, I think, well, maybe Hansen wants all the publicity. I noticed he was kind of around the camera a little bit, but I mean, if I was really looking for the interest of my defendant or my client, I definitely would take all the lawyer help I could, whether it requires putting in a little motion to the court asking them to accept my help.
Well, apparently what I talked with Mrs. Bundy earlier today, and she had talked with them, and they were making well, we wanted to make sure that he's on the same page with us. They go, he's a constitutionalist, he's conservative. What, and I don't know why
Yeah.
they're hemming and hawing. I really don't.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's something fishy going on there. I can't figure it all out, but there's some type of politics going on there.
Yep, it sure is.
Right.
So, cruel and unusual punishment. Cliven Bundy is still in medical solitary. It's over 80 days now. Ryan Bundy, and I think that they're really scared of him because he's named himself a pro se and what have you. They're keeping him out of the law library. They're keeping him in segregation. I mean, that's for what? For having an extra towel and an extra shirt.
Well, Roger, we're going to have to work on that a little bit. I always say if Clyde would accept me as his assistant to counsel, I think I could get him out of lockdown. I really do. And you need to file a lawsuit. There's no doubt in my mind. You got to sue him and file for an injunctive relief. I just got a lot of case law that supports that pleading. And I think, but if they're not going to file, they're going to stay in lockdown. So it's somewhat their own fault by not making their lawyers demand that they're not be punished and they're only pretrial detainees. There's so much case law that pretrial detainees can't be punished like convicted prisoners.
No,
and
it's
they
insane.
should be out in open confinement. They shouldn't be in solitary confinement. But the only way you're going to get that through is to sue them. I'm telling you that. And maybe we better get that worded. I didn't know Ryan Bundy was in solitary confinement. That didn't.
Yes, and when they brought him down here to Nevada, they put him back in solitary here for what he done, what they accused him of in an extra towel. And I think he had he had a conversation with the chaplain. The chaplain said the police can shoot anyone they want at any time, and Ryan disagreed with that.
Well, Roger, next time you talk to Ryan, if you have any communication, mention that I want to sue him, and I will draw up the lawsuit for him. That's my game anyway. I've probably sued more prison wardens than anybody in the United States. So,
okay, well, here I got another one for you. I got another one for you. The men in Pahrump at this private facility in Pahrump, which is owned by Dick Cheney, by the way, I understand. They're having carbon monoxide problems. They've got these generators, and the smokestacks aren't tall enough, and the carbon monoxide's coming into the people I talked to. There were at least 3 areas that they were getting poisoned. Men that came in with absolutely no health problems now have breathing issues and pain issues and all that nausea and stuff because of this carbon monoxide. I want those men moved.
Okay, well, yeah, or I'll file a lawsuit. That's the only way you're going to do it.
Well, my friend, who's actually a pro se litigant on his own case, has started notices and stuff to them. And so I actually sent that to the other prisoners so they could do the same thing and get that rolling.
Well, I think you've seen my lawsuit that I filed against the Portland jail because they returned some of my mail from Ryan Bundy. I think I mailed that to you.
Yeah, it was it was some real good kick assets, I'll tell you.
Yeah, and that will get their attention. That's the only thing. I think that does more, gets more of the warden's attention than publicity to some degree. Or phone calls from celebrities, put it that way. So I firmly believe I had a lot of calls when I was in prison, and it didn't do a hell of a lot of good. But when I filed lawsuits, they either changed their system or they moved me. And obviously I got the diesel therapy for doing it, but I got the satisfaction that they paid attention to my injunctions.
Right. So that's an interesting point that, we've got to start suing them. And so it's just really frustrating to me not to get people returning phone calls when I'm offering them, free legal help like Roger, and they won't call me back.
Right. Well,
so, and I just want to say something about the original Bundy case when they lost. They actually went to the Ninth Circuit to lose. They planned to lose, but they wanted to go to the Supreme Court. And when I assume that the corruption in Nevada, everybody that said they would be what do they call that, amicus curiae or something, friend of the court, everybody declined. Everybody that promised them before, oh yeah, if you do this, we'll help you with this. Everyone declined. They were gotten to.
Wow. Who was their lawyer?
Well,
Was Hanson the lawyer to the Ninth Circuit too?
No, I don't know who represented them there. I bet
well,
we could probably look
sometimes
that
it's
up.
tough to get, sometimes it's tough to get the lawyers to follow up. Some of them get busy, and a lot of this stuff happens really fast. I mean, it really does. And a lawyer might get an email saying, "Hey, we want you to file a brief in 4 days," and they just don't have the time. So,
Well, see, that's what they're doing to Mike Arnold. He was down here for the arraignment, and what they did for Ammon, and what they did, the Judge Brown knew that, and so she said that she needed something in 90 minutes for him to file, knowing that he was down here in Nevada and needed it filed on the Oregon case. So we think it's really unjust, and there's no way these men can get a fair trial when they're trying to defend themselves in two suits. How do you feel about that, Roger?
Well, I can tell you, it's very almost unprecedented. It's something. It's on new. You could call it a new plowed earth, practically. It's stuff that I'm not even familiar with. There have been many cases, for example, involving the mafia, where an accusation, the government will accuse a mafia individual of doing something in one case in New York, and then also, maybe having a hand in some other stuff in Illinois or something. But I'm not familiar of another case where they're taking people from one U.S. district court that's 1,000 miles away from another one, flying them back and forth for arraignment and other proceedings, and then flying them back. And then there's the speedy trial clock that is ticking in both jurisdictions. It's very, very unusual.
Yeah, and I think they want to make it as miserable as possible. I don't know what it was like when you gentlemen went to court. Well, you were guests at the motel, but what they do with these men in Pahrump is they get them up at 3:30 in the morning, give them a crappy breakfast at 4, shackle them by 5, and then put them in the van, and they're up here in Nevada by 6:30 or 7, and they make them wait until 3 o'clock in the afternoon for their hearing, and then get them back to back to Pahrump, and they have 2 bologna sandwiches all day. And if they're not back by a certain time, like 6:45, then they have to wait till 8 o'clock after the count is done. I mean, can you imagine what that's going to be like with a trial? No, these men have to be moved out of there.
Well, I can tell you that these guys really should not be detained. They need to be out so they can defend themselves. Because, listen, I can show you. I read, newspaper stories all the time of first-degree murder defendants who are given bail. They're given the opportunity. Sometimes the bail is set very high, $1 million, for example, where they can't actually raise the money. But nonetheless, it's absolutely it's a violation of the Eighth Amendment.
Sure, murderers and rapists get out on bail. These are good family men. They're destroying their businesses.
Yep, all the time. And it's just they cannot defend themselves in this state.
No,
they just cannot defend themselves from a jail cell like this.
No, and the interesting thing is that when they were in their pretrial detention hearings, that they were or release hearings, they were telling them that if they let them out, they were making a stipulation that they couldn't talk with their friends.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's ridiculous. They need to be able to put their heads together on a defense here.
It's the most fundamental right when you're accused of an accusation to be able to, investigate, to dig into the evidence, to meet witnesses, to actually build up your defense. And these guys are being absolutely deprived.
I know it's shocking that they can be this blatant about it, but it's Bolshevik. It's Bolshevik America. I mean, this is the Gulag, no doubt about it. And actually, Harry Reid, I've heard from someone, an elected official, that Harry Reid gave the order: put these men in the worst facilities you can find and treat them like crap. That was the order.
Why would Harry Reid write an order like that? I don't understand it.
Oh, because he's the vendetta. This is all his vindictiveness. because he wants that land. He owns the rest of the land around the Bundy Ranch. They want that land for something. It's where the Virgin River runs through. They want the water. They want this. He owns a big parcel. He paid a lot for it, like $700,000 for the parcel to the south of the ranch. And so you've got to read this whole thing. Ryan actually talks about it in the videos that we made with him the summer after the standoff. And there's been other people that I've talked to about this and how corrupt he is. And so his fingerprints are all over this. He has it in for the Bundys. He's mad that he didn't get the land that he wanted when he wanted it. And and just say that, and they keep putting out that line that they owe $1 million.
He's starved to death out there unless there's something underneath that land that I don't know about. But I know he certainly couldn't be a cowboy, because that's a pretty you have to have a little experience to survive in that industry.
Oh no, there's mineral rights, and the water running through there is very valuable.
Yeah, obviously that's true. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty desert type country out there. I don't see how those cattle stay in such good shape. I was kind of marveled at the condition of the cattle, so that the grass must have some kick in it, or some protein, as they say. And then obviously it's a certain breed of cattle that can survive out in that desert. These Angus cattle we raise up here in northwestern part of the States couldn't survive in that desert heat. I know that.
No, and they in the summer you'll see them laying down like by the river, like they're having a picnic, or they're up in the mountains and stuff to cool off.
Right.
Yeah,
they know where to go.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and the treatment these men have gotten. Like Mel Bundy, when he was arrested for no reason, he was beaten up, chained to a wall for 40 hours. I mean, they literally, his wife said, beat the crap out of him. He vomited on himself, urinated on himself because they wouldn't let him use the bathroom for 40 hours. And then when they did feed him, they threw an orange and a piece of stale bread on the floor and said, "Here, eat that."
Yeah.
These men have been abused.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, quit yapping about it. File lawsuits. That's what I did. I understand. I was in the same situation.
Yeah. Well, I don't have standing, and these folks have not even known anyone in prison, much less been in prison.
I agree. I understand that, but I'm trying to get them to contact me, and
I know. I'm with you, Rudy. I'm trying hard to. I make calls every day about this. So maybe some other folks send some emails, post some stuff on Facebook. Right. Roger Roos and Rudy Stanko need to be on this case if these men are going to get any kind of a fair shot.
There we go. Get rid of that cruel and unusual punishment clause of the 8th Amendment. That's what you call Bivens versus 6 unknown narcotics agents. The Supreme Court ruled that you could sue the government officials under the Constitution clauses of the United States Constitution, the clauses of the United States.
Right. So that's what a Bivens tort is. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah. That would be a constitutional tort because of cruel and unusual punishment.
And so tell me again, who was Bivens?
Pardon?
Who was Bivens? Why was it named after this man?
I think the narcotics agent broke into Bivens' house without a warrant. He took some property, and he filed a lawsuit against him for damages.
Well, that's what they feel like in the Finicum that night where Lavoy Finicum was killed, that they didn't have any warrant, they didn't have any probable cause, and that's why it took them 5 hours after they shot Lavoy, after they started this thing, to get a judge out of bed to sign date some warrants and things. It's corrupt.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I should say, there's a set of statutes in the U.S. Code, Section 1983. I think it's 28 U.S.C. Section 1983, and sections of 1981 and other sections that they call the Civil Rights Acts, where you can sue in federal court state government officials.
Yes.
All right. So then the Bivens case sort of arose because, well, there's this, on the one hand, you can under those civil rights statutes, which have been on the books for 100 years, you could sue state government officials, but there was nothing on the law books, at least in the U.S. Code, that at that time allowed you to sue federal officials. And so Bivens was a case, sort of a landmark case, went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they ruled that, in fact, you don't need a statute. You can actually just cite the Fourth Amendment itself. They violated the Fourth Amendment right to freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures, and that itself is, the Bivens case stands for the proposition that you can sue in federal court federal agents who violate the Constitution.
But, our experience is that the agents hide behind their agency. So this Bivens tort situation will take away their agency and get to them as an individual. And
well, listen, the courts have perfected all of these obstacles. A big one is qualified immunity. These government officials will claim that they are immune from suit, or at least if they're not totally immune, they're qualified immune. They're immune from the reasonable scope of stuff that they are allowed to do on their job, and so they can't be sued for that. And the courts basically have bent over backwards for the government over the years, and so it is very difficult. But you almost have to prove a knowing violation, that the officers knew they were breaking the law. And usually when you can show that, especially with an email or where they said something like that, then you got a case.
Good. Well, the feds are trying to make up that all the Bundy supporters are violent, and so we're a danger. And so that's why they have to have protective orders about what they release. And, it makes you wonder if they're going to file a protective order so they don't have to answer, this bill of particulars or some other interrogatories that you file. Oh, it puts our agents, puts our attorneys in danger.
Yeah, and keep in mind, when they make that claim that they don't have to give the names of for example, the officers, it also allows, over time, the courts have bent over backwards in these kinds of cases for the government, and it has developed that a lot of federal FBI agents have just gotten used to this kind of stuff, and so they invent fake informants. Literally, on search warrant applications, they will just invent a fake informant and say, this person who I won't name because the courts allow me not to name this person, he said this. And then, you come to find out there no such person exists.
All right, everybody, we're coming up on the end of the hour. I've got to tell you, you must get a copy of The Conviction Factory. Roger, what's the best place to order a copy of your book?
Well, you just go to Amazon. Amazon's the easiest place.
Amazon's
go to Amazon.
And you have to,
my
and you
name,
might as
Roger
well,
Roots, or the title.
Right. Okay. Roger Roots or the title. Excellent. The Conviction Factory. And you might as well, if you're going to order one, you might as well get free shipping and order two. Can we get this at Amazon too, Rudy, the score?
I think so. I'm not for sure, but if not, you can get it from my place at Post Office Box 509, Gordon, Nebraska.
Excellent.
69443.
Well, folks, I told you these were law giants tonight. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We've appreciated it.